Hello and welcome to a discussion video and a response video, which is something I miss from the old days of YouTube, was the ability to actually make video responses and attach them to a video that was asking for responses, or even if it wasn't, I suppose, but it was such a cool feature. It was an interactive feature that expanded upon the various communities that had formed in YouTube fairly naturally in terms of things that people talked about, whether it was movies or books or makeup, whatever. You'd have communities kind of just like growing and growing, and then video responses were there where you could just kind of have like a visual chat through, obviously it was staggered because it wouldn't be in real time, but you could kind of make a video response to someone, attach it to their video, then they could watch it, and so on and so on. And I just don't know why they removed that. And so, you kind of, should I make a video and reply to that? I don't know. But for this, I thought it was appropriate to make a video response. Even if I'm not going to go super in-depth on this one, but it is a response to my good friend Daisuke Beppu's video that he posted recently, asking his viewers what are some of their favorite, or who are some of their favorite filmmakers, which is a very broad question, and I've compiled a list of my favorite filmmakers in no particular order, but he also made a video asking people what are their favorite films of all time, which has given me a kick up the arse to, I think, actually sit down and make a video talking about my maybe top 20 favorite films of all time. But we'll get to that when we get to that. That's gonna require a lot of thinking on my part, and I have a lot to say about it, and a lot to say on just the idea of making that kind of video, just the idea of making that kind of list. I have a lot of thoughts on that, which I'll leave for that video. This one's a bit easier, a bit more kind of free-flowing, and again, in no particular order, I've written a list of like 20 plus directors whose films I really love, and there's probably more that I'm forgetting. I was kind of glancing around my whole collection to kind of like hone in on certain directors and things. I have like box sets of certain directors, I have like sections of certain directors, and so that helped, but there's probably a few that I'm missing that are kind of vital. But the first one that jumped out to me really was Akira Kurosawa, who is absolutely one of my favorite filmmakers. Just the breadth of his work is just incredible. The time period of his work from the 40s, I think he started making films in 1944, 1945. Those first few early films are really interesting to me because it's, again, I could completely go off on tangents here. This could be like an hour and a half long video, and try and make it a little bit succinct, but I will kind of go off into tangents, I think. But yeah, the first few films he made are really interesting because you can see glimpses and glimmers of the brilliance that he would bring to later films. And then you get to like once you hit 1950, like it's just classic. Rashomon, Hidden Fortress, Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, Sanjuro, Ikiru, he was just making some incredible films. I haven't seen all of his films. I'm really holding out for that. I really wish Criterion would at least let us know what's going on, because they haven't released an upgrade in years at this point. Every time I get that email every month saying here are our new Criterion releases for next month, or not next month, it'll be like they're like a few months ahead of the schedule, but they'll be saying here are our Criterion releases for May 2020, and I'll be like, come on, Kurosawa, and it never happens. Throne of Blood is another great one from the 50s, and actually Throne of Blood is the only Criterion I need to get from the Kurosawa collection, in the Criterion collection, Blu-ray versions anyway. So I'm really holding out for Redbeard. That's the big one that I'm waiting for like a high definition version of before I watch it for the first time. And I recently, a few years ago, did my Kurosawa in color marathon. So even his later career, I think, is actually vastly underrated. I think that Desu Uzala is one of his best films and just needs to be seen more. And I think part of that is just the availability of it is really not where it needs to be. So again, Criterion, I would love to see a Blu-ray release of that film. But there was some talk of maybe them not releasing upgrades of his films because they're working on a big box set. That to me would just be like the ultimate release, like the Ingmar Bergman cinema box set, but Kurosawa. I'd pay unreasonable amounts of money for that. But yeah, Kurosawa, and again, like his later films, just some really great stuff going on there. Even in some of the ones that aren't as great, even his final film Madadayo, which isn't like his best work, but there's some really great stuff going on there. So if you want to hear me talk about Kurosawa more, go check out the Kurosawa in Color Marathon. I was really happy with that video. Wes Anderson is a big one for me. I love all of his films, and it's weird because every time he makes a new movie, it seems like he's just like the past 3 or 4 movies he's made, I've watched the trailer and gone, wow, he's finally done it. He's gone full Wes Anderson, and then it just keeps happening. So The French Dispatch was supposed to come out this year. Who knows when that's ever going to get released at this point. The trailer for that was very entertaining, but I love all of his films. It's one of those rare things where I love every single one of his films. Obviously, there are varying degrees of that, but I love Bottle Rocket. Rushmore is one of my favorite films of all time. Spoilers. Royal Tenenbaums is excellent. The Life Aquatic is great. The Darjeeling Limited is really underrated, I think. Fantastic Mr. Fox is incredible. Moonrise Kingdom, I've only seen once. I need to go back to that. Grand Budapest Hotel is wonderful. And then Isle of Dogs, I absolutely loved. So it's rare for a director to have this kind of flawless filmography in terms of my personal enjoyment, and he's right up there for me. Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, obviously they're more recognized as stars of their own movies, but they're both, I think, brilliant directors in their own right. Buster Keaton, in terms of the way he could construct a comedy, I think is kind of unmatched, at least in the silent era, and Charlie Chaplin had more of a penchant for drama and emotion, which I think really comes out in his later sound movies. I actually think Charlie Chaplin is a much better filmmaker, or was a much better filmmaker in the sound era. I think his silent stuff is really good, but he just did some amazing stuff with sound, and I think The Great Dictator and particularly Limelight are 2 incredible films, and he's a really great director. I think Chaplin had a real keen eye for emotional storytelling, and so I love both of them. John Carpenter is a big one. Of course, I'm doing the big 24-hour movie marathon completing Carpenter video, which I hope to release very soon, where I watched all of the films of his I haven't seen. So I've now seen every John Carpenter film. In fact, I have here on the shelf behind me every single John Carpenter film he ever made, and I've seen all of them, and I love almost all of them. Actually, there's only a couple there that maybe 2 or 3 that I think aren't really that good, or aren't great. The rest I either love or really, really like. So that's just a never-ending list, and you'll hear me talking about that more in the marathon video when it comes. But obviously favorites are like The Thing and They Live. Starman is incredible. A lot of the films that I saw in that movie marathon, it was just that was one of my favorite movie watching experiences of my life, was sitting down with 13 or 14 John Carpenter films I'd never seen before, and I'm literally just watching amazing movie after amazing movie. Prince of Darkness was a big one. I think one of the best horror films I've ever seen. Anyway, John Carpenter is great. I love his style. Richard Linklater is another big one for me. Now, he's one who I love, but not all of his films are great. So it's not like a Wes Anderson thing where I love all of his films. There's films here and there, like what's that film that I watched in one of the 24-hour movie marathons? It was A Scanner Darkly. Not a very good film, I enjoyed it, I appreciated it, but it didn't quite have the special quality that some of his other films had. But Slacker, Dazed and Confused, and there's a real range to some of the stuff that he's done. School of Rock, but then the Before trilogy, which are just, I may have like a section here. So the Before trilogy, Boyhood, masterpiece. I think Everybody Wants Some is so enjoyable. And even some of his more recent stuff. Last Flag Flying was a really great film, I thought. Kind of underrated, I think. But I love Richard Linklater, and specifically kind of the stuff he does with time, like the Before trilogy and Boyhood. But even beyond that, I think he's a great filmmaker and has a really authentic voice in terms of the films that he writes, I think. Quentin Tarantino is a kind of obvious one, but I can't deny that I really enjoy most of his films. Pulp Fiction is incredible. Jackie Brown, probably my favorite. The Kill Bill movies, just so wacky and wonderful. Inglourious Basterds, maybe his best film. Revisiting that recently was a real eye-opener. That's such an incredible film. His more later stuff, like The Hateful Eight and Django Unchained, were entertaining, but not great for me, I don't know. And then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, again, some amazing stuff, but overall didn't quite work for me. And Death Proof is one of my favorites. I absolutely love Death Proof. Edgar Wright's definitely a favorite filmmaker. He has such a specific style, and he executes it pretty much perfectly. I love all of his films. Need to revisit Scott Pilgrim. I've only seen that once. Really enjoyed it, but obviously my my kind of affection is in the Cornetto trilogy mainly. But Baby Driver was just lights out, fantastic. Hayao Miyazaki is another one who has a pretty much flawless filmography, I think. Obviously all animated films, but that makes no difference to me. I think he has maybe one of the best filmographies of any director ever, because, you know, pretty much like there's a middle point of his, or a middle section of his filmography that is just like unbelievable. Like the run he goes on is just unbelievable. I think from Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind, which is like a great kind of fantasy action adventure epic, you then go to Castle in the Sky, which I think is one of the best adventure films ever made. Then you go straight to My Neighbor Totoro, which I think is one of the best kids movies ever made. Then you go to Kiki's Delivery Service, which I think is one of the best coming-of-age movies ever made. Then you go to Porco Rosso, which I think, even objectively, is a pretty damn good film. And then you go to Princess Mononoke, which is, I think, one of the best animated films ever. And then you got Spirited Away, which everyone, you know, raves about, and I'm not as enamored with it as everyone else, but I love all of his films, and they're so rich, and I could talk about them forever, pretty much. Steven Spielberg is one that I think is like, I think everyone needs to have that. Well, maybe they don't need to, but it's just like, he has such a very, I think he has one of the best filmographies just in terms of variety, the things that he's done from his early stuff like Duel and Jaws and Close Encounters of the First Kind, and then you get to the 80s and it's like E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark, Last Crusade. It's just, you know, just so many different kind of tones, and then you have the more serious stuff he's done, even recently like Bridge of Spies, which was excellent. Tintin, you know, there's just such, as I said, variety. Even Ready Player One, I absolutely love. So I mean, and he's still going, you know, he's rattling out these films, and maybe that's where the quality isn't always incredible. You look at someone like Edgar Wright, who only makes a film every 3 or 4 years, and when he does, it's so laser focused, you can tell he spent years working on this. Spielberg, not so much in some cases, and so you get to the point where Spielberg will release just a really good film, not an amazing film. But there's something to that where I like the fact that he doesn't like hold himself back. He's always making movies. He seems to love it, obviously, and I think he has a great career. He's not maybe one I'd go like he's one of my absolute favorites because of the variety, but you know, I couldn't not mention him, I guess, when talking about favorite filmmakers. Hirokazu Kore-eda, a Japanese filmmaker, is probably my favorite director working today, just in terms of how great his recent filmography has been. Just a stellar, you know, selection of work, and I've been really digging into his films in the past year or two, from Still Walking to I Wish, Like Father, Like Son, Our Little Sister, Shoplifters, Afterlife, Nobody Knows. Just like incredible film after incredible film. For the most part, very kind of down-to-earth, naturalistic family drama stuff. But then you look at something like Afterlife, which is like completely different. Not that he does lots of completely different things. He mostly is family drama. But I really love his films. There's just something about them. I love the way he tells stories in his films. And I think that he's one of the great directors working today. I'd even say I prefer his stuff to Bong Joon-ho. Not to compare them, because they're both Asian, but you have like this big kind of Bong Joon-ho kind of moment of this year when he won the Oscars and everything. I think Kore-eda should have been up for Oscars for many of his recent films over the past 10 years or so. But that's just one of those things where it's about timing, and it's about, I think Parasite just had so much momentum, and it's such a crowd pleaser, and I don't know, I think it's easier to gain acclaim with a movie like Parasite, where it's such a gripping movie, whereas I feel like Kore-eda's stuff is much more subtle, and that's more to my tastes, I think. So I get more wrapped up in a film like, say, Our Little Sister, or Like Father, Like Son, or I try to think of another one that's recent that really Shoplifters. Because I don't know, there's more of the subtlety to it. Not that, you know, Parasite isn't subtle. I don't know why I'm pitting these two off each other. But I don't know. I guess in the back of my head, I think that Kore-eda is in many ways maybe the best director working right now. Maybe I'm just going way too far off on this, but yeah, I don't know. I just love his style. There's something about it that speaks to me, I guess, and so it is what it is. I'll leave all that in for free. I don't feel like it was really necessary to compare him to Bong Joon-ho. It's not like a competition. They're both great filmmakers. They both make great films. Everyone wins, But yeah, following that, Alfred Hitchcock. Don't really watch a lot of his films. I've seen many of them. I have many more to explore, and that excites me. And I like having films like that from great directors that I know are kind of in my back pocket, So I don't. In one way, I do enjoy rattling through lots of directors' films, like the John Carpenter marathon I did. But I also love kind of just holding on to certain ones. And actually, there's another director on this list that I'm really holding on to some of their films. But Hitchcock, from Rear Window, which is my favorite, I think, Rope, which I love. Even some of his earlier films. There's a really early one from the 30s called Sabotage, which is incredible. I love that film. Definitely, I want to revisit that now. Now I'm thinking about it. Sabotage is a great film. And then obviously his like Psycho, it kind of gets really big. Then The Birds was one that I actually really was not expecting to enjoy as much as I did. The Birds is fucking incredible. And there's a few that aren't as good, like some of his silent stuff I didn't like as much. Torn Curtain was just okay. But, it's Hitchcock, and I think he's one of the masters, and, he couldn't not be up there for me. Strangers on a Train is another great one. Anyway, moving on from that, we have Naoko Ogigami, who is maybe in a way also my favorite current working director. I'm really excited to see what she does next, which is the details of which are very scarce, really. I think it's just a title of the next movie she's making. But, if you follow my channel, I've waffled on about her enough. I keep beating the drum for Naoko Ogigami. And, it's kind of fitting with Daisuke because we both did a collaborative series together called Naoko Ogigami Retrospective, where we reviewed her entire filmography, and with the help of Daisuke, because some of her films are just not available with English subtitles. But like her most recent run of feature films are kind of available with English subtitles, and I've just become such a big fan of her work over the past few years. So films like Close Knit, which is an amazing film, I think, just a brilliant drama, and then Seagull Diner, Glasses, Rent-A-Cat. I think she's a wonderful filmmaker. I think she has a particular style, and it goes to the auteur theory, which I agree with the auteur theory to some degree. I also don't believe that the director is everything. Obviously, it's a huge part of any film, but I think maybe sometimes the emphasis on the director gets placed too much when you can also be looking at the writers and, all the people who put a film together. But I do think there's something to the auteur theory at the same time. And I like when you see an auteur who isn't overtly an auteur. I think she is a subtle auteur. I watch one of her films and I instantly feel that it's one of her films. It's something about the sensibilities of the way she writes characters and the way that she tells stories that is so, I think, uniquely her. There's a kind of weird sense of humor to it that doesn't, for the most part, go too over the top. But there is this kind of humor that is really playful and I really love. But there's also this kind of zen-ness to the way she tells stories, which I really like, and I can't wait to see what she does next. Agnes Varda is another big one for me. I love Agnes Varda. I haven't yet to see a film from her that I haven't really, really liked, if not loved. And another one with such a varied career, from documentaries to narrative fiction. And I have a box set with a lot of her films, and I'm just sitting on it because, especially now that she passed this year, at the age, I think 91 she was. I don't know. I love feeling like I've got more of Agnes Varda's films to explore, and it seems like Criterion are going to release a box set of her films too, which I'm really excited about. In some ways, because I'm sure they're going to release films that aren't in the Artificial Eye box set I have. I don't know why I'm pointing to it on my shelf behind the camera as if you can see it, but it is on the shelf. But yeah, and it's going to be really pricey, but I already have a lot of her films, but Criterion giving her films the treatment they absolutely deserve is really exciting to me. I'm really interested to see what the lineup is going to be, what the extras are going to be like, but just in general, I love Agnes Varda. Another one who's really playful, a lot more playful than Naoko Ogigami, but in a literal sense, she's literally being playful in front of the camera when she's making documentary. I love how she makes herself a part of her documentaries. She's very fluid and free-flowing with the way that she makes documentaries, which is really exciting to me. Almost every time I see one of her films, it gets me excited and just jazzed up about movies. and I can't think of a bigger compliment to pay to a director. I just love her outlook, and I think that she was just such a shining light in the world of movies. And it's a shame that she's gone, but she's left behind a hell of a legacy and some great films that I still have yet to enjoy. Then we have John Hughes, who, you know, again, there's kind of a signature style there, but also very emblematic of the 80s. And Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller, Trains, Planes, and Automobiles, some of my very favorite films, I think. And there's a few more that I haven't seen. No, I think there's only a couple I haven't seen, but you know, they just all seem to have his imprint on them, even down to like the films that he wrote, like Home Alone. You can feel John Hughes when you watch it, and it's just so entertaining. It's so enjoyable. There's kind of a renegade flair to the stories that he tells, and it's just super enjoyable for me. It's kind of escapism, American teenagers, I don't know. Loved his films growing up, love his films now. And Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is a big one for me. I adore that film. I think that's a masterpiece that the Criterion Collection should probably release, actually. Moving on, we have Fritz Lang. Amazing. Probably, I think, maybe the best filmmaker from the silent era, which is a bold claim. I haven't seen everything, but I mean, another incredibly varied filmography. I haven't seen much of his sound work from Hollywood, but in Germany in the 1920s, I mean, he's just untouchable as a genre filmmaker. You know, from the beginning of the 20s, you know, look at like this crime epic, Dr. Mabuse de Spieler, and then you go to this amazing fantasy epic that predates like Lord of the Rings with Die Nibelungen, like a 5-hour fantasy, like Game of Thrones-esque movie. And then he goes and does, you know, just Metropolis casually, one of the kind of the towering pillars of science fiction cinema. And then he does a spy movie, espionage. Then he does science fiction and goes to the moon with Frau Immond. Like, it's just amazing what he did as a filmmaker, and that's only in the silent era. So I think he had that run in the 20s is one of the great director runs, I think. Just an amazing scope of genre, and always with a firm grasp on really telling a great story, but also wowing the audience while doing it in many different ways throughout all of those many different genres. Denis Villeneuve is another recent one who I haven't seen his earlier films, but from Prisoners onwards, you're just looking at some amazing stuff. Enemy was a film I didn't quite fully grasp. Need to see that one again, but Prisoners, I think, is a masterpiece. Arrival is an amazing film. And then you have Blade Runner 2049, Sicario as well. He's really firing on all cylinders, and I cannot wait to see what he does with Dune whenever we get to see that. That's a really exciting prospect, I think, and he's just a really, I mean, the thing that really, I mean, obviously I love his films, but in Blade Runner 2049, not to spoil anything, but the whole question in the original Blade Runner about Rick Deckard was, is he a replicant or is he not? And there's always that ambiguity of it because it's never really fully answered. And there are people on one side, there are people on the other. Even with Ridley Scott and Harrison Ford, they have differing opinions on it. And with 2049, I was like, please don't answer the question in one way or the other. And it's touched on in 2049, but there's this one scene where an idea is presented to Deckard, Harrison Ford, and, you know, with one line of dialogue, he could probably confirm against or for the theory that he is a replicant and not a human being. And all Deckard says is, I know what's real. And I felt like standing up and cheering in the cinema. I was like, yes, keep the ambiguity. The answer is with the audience. Exactly the way that it should be. And I didn't know where that came from, but I was watching the behind the scenes, and Denis Villeneuve was saying that that was important to him, to not answer that question, but to leave it ambiguous. I just thought, he knows what he's fucking doing. David Lynch. This is one over the past few years that I've just really fallen in love with. It started with Twin Peaks, and then like going back to his films, Eraserhead, which I need to revisit, I think. But really, Twin Peaks, such a huge fan of it, and the most recent season was, I think, one of the best pieces of cinema I've seen ever, maybe, just as a complete piece. And then I made last year Lynch Fest, which I'm now continuing because I want to keep doing it. I watched Wild at Heart, which that's really stuck with me, and also Lost Highway, and then mainly Mulholland Drive, which is such a great film. And then I listened to the audiobook of David Lynch's semi-autobiography. It's a really interesting book where he has a friend of his who is writing about his life. She'll write a chapter about a certain section in his life, and then he'll do a follow-up chapter commenting on that period of his life himself. And the audiobook has him reading it. And it's like 15 hours long, and I just was absorbed in his life story. It really enamored me with him in ways that his films hadn't, but then it also strengthened the love I had for his film and his work in movies. And so, yeah, there's more for me to discover with David Lynch. There's Inland Empire, I think is the last film of his I haven't seen yet, but there's other things to explore as well. So, and like some of his shorts and things like that. Anyway, so David Lynch, I really have loved his stuff. Blue Velvet was another one that I want to revisit as well. So, yeah, love David Lynch, and it's a very particular kind of style that doesn't float for everyone. I understand that, but I've really become a fan of his. Rian Johnson is another current working director who might actually be up there as one of my favorite current working directors. Actually, love almost all of his films, actually. So I hadn't seen Brick, and I hadn't seen The Brothers Bloom. Recently I watched The Brothers Bloom, loved it, and in this year's 24-hour movie marathon 9, which you might see in about 3 or 4 years time when I finished editing it, me and Connie watched his first film, Brick. I didn't love it. Yeah, a little bit iffy on it. So it was kind of like, the master is fallible, I guess. But I love Looper. I think Brothers Bloom, as I said, is a great film. The Last Jedi is, up there for me as one of my favorite films, maybe. And then also Knives Out, which Knives Out was just phenomenal. So Rian Johnson, whatever he does next, I'm there day one. So, that to me is the definition of a favorite filmmaker, when you're just going to be there for whatever they do next. Pavel Pawlikowski, which I was debating whether or not to put this in here because I've only seen 2 of his films. And there's plenty of those, but this one just jumped out to me because the 2 films of his I have seen, I think, are absolute masterpieces, and I think they might be back-to-back films. I'm not sure if he did anything in between both of them. The first one is Ida, and the second film is Cold War from a couple of years ago. Polish filmmaker. Ida is just an incredible film, and then Cold War is just, I think, one of the best, sub 90-minute movies I've ever seen. It covers so much in, I think, 80 minutes or something, and it's one of the most visually stunning films I've ever seen. He is a truly master filmmaker, so I want to see more of his stuff, and again, as soon as he makes another film, I'm there day one. But I did try to classify a favorite filmmaker in this video as someone who's made a lot of films that I've seen, but I had to kind of give him a name check there. Makoto Shinkai, another anime director. I've seen all of his films, and there's some really great ones in there. It doesn't always gel together, but when he kind of aligns everything, it's just magic. Your Name, I think, is just an absolute masterpiece. It's such a great film, and it feels like his entire filmography was building towards a film like Your Name. Weathering with You, I just watched at the cinema a couple of months ago. Has a few flaws, and it's a little bit similar to Your Name, but it's such a beautiful film. I love watching his films just visually. So that alone, I think, for me is kind of a big thing. But I really love his very melodramatic way of telling romantic stories. It plays to my sensibilities a little bit. It plays to the romantic in me, I think. Joe Dante is another one who just a very it's varied in one way and it's not varied in another. He makes very specific genre film, like Inner Space, and then the Gremlins movie, Small Soldiers, Matinee. But The Burbs is one of my favorite films. That's just, so that alone would put him on my favorite filmmakers list. But I love Gremlins. Inner Space is so much fun. Small Soldiers was one as a kid I absolutely loved. The concept of that, of these toys coming to life, was, I'm not sure, that came out after Toy Story, didn't it? I don't know if that was trying to capitalize on Toy Story, but I loved that film. And I just think Joe Dante is he's such a fun filmmaker. He just makes such entertaining genre movies, And The Burbs is, I think, one of my favorite comedies of all time, if not one of my favorite films of all time in general. Again, spoilers. A few more. We've got Tim Burton. I love a lot of his films. I love the Tim Burton kind of style. It's not always for me, and sometimes it goes a little bit too dark at times, like Sleepy Hollow. I do love Sleepy Hollow, but it's going too far down into the darkness. I like kind of like Edward Scissorhands, where it's the darkness, but there's the lightness, and there's kind of a contrast. And I love his Batman movies. Beetlejuice is just an amazing film. So I love Tim Burton stuff. I really liked Dumbo from last year. That was a really cool twist on the Disney movie in live action form. But I'm always interested in what Tim Burton does, even if it doesn't always land. And then Stanley Kubrick. I don't know if I can call him my favorite filmmaker because I've only seen a few of his films. Clockwork Orange, of course, The Shining, Lolita. But I'm trying to... A Full Metal Jacket I've seen. So there's a few that I have. Oh no, 2001: A Space. So I've seen quite a few of his films. But I haven't seen Barry Lyndon. I haven't seen Eyes Wide Shut. I think that might be it, actually. Oh no, yeah, because I've seen Doctor Strange. Okay, so I've seen most of his films actually, but Paths of Glory I've seen. Holy shit, I'm like a Stanley Kubrick expert. I didn't even know it. No, definitely not a Kubrick expert, but I love. I mean, it's just there's this epic canvas feel to Kubrick's films. It's just almost like unlike anything, which very much ties into the next one, which is Christopher Nolan. And he has a similar feel. I feel like he has to have been inspired by Kubrick in terms of the big scope filmmaking that he does. But Christopher Nolan is another one that I think has a pretty much flawless filmography. His debut film Following is not great, but there's some great stuff in it. Insomnia is really good. But I mean, once you get to Batman Begins, it's just great movie after great movie. The Dark Knight's incredible. The Prestige is awesome. Dark Knight Rises is really underrated. I think it's a phenomenal blockbuster. Inception, masterpiece. Interstellar, I think, is his best film and just an amazing science fiction film. That and Interstellar is just huge to me. Every time I watch it, I'm just like, this is so fucking great. Like, I get blown away with it every time. It's an amazing film. Hans Zimmer is a big part of Interstellar, though, I will say. And then Dunkirk was brilliant. It's not my favorite film, you know. But you can't deny the quality of his filmmaking. Well, I guess you can if you don't like it. But I think there's such a high quality, such a high bar to his films, and I'm really intrigued to see Tenet when that comes out. And with Interstellar, I avoided all the trailers, and that was an amazing experience to go in completely blind to a big Nolan movie. I'm going to try and do the same for Tenet. And then finally, James Cameron. It just there's just something about his sensibilities. I guess that's what a filmmaker is. They're projecting their own sensibilities into the films that they make. But Cameron, I don't know. He's such a great storyteller, and I feel like people have really gone cold on him recently. Maybe I can understand why, but Terminator, incredible. Absolutely incredible. I call that a horror movie. People disagree with me. It's a horror movie. It's a slasher movie as well as a sci-fi movie, and it's just an amazing piece of work. Pretty much right out of the gate. I mean, he'd done another film before that, but as far as like a completely like James Cameron authorship idea, The Terminator was kind of like his unofficial first feature film. And then you have The Abyss, which needs a fucking Blu-ray release. Give us that film in high definition already. Aliens, before that, actually. I mean, one of my favorite films of all time, Aliens. Just, what a way to take a film like Alien and then expand upon it and do something slightly different, make it feel completely in line with everything that came before, but tell it in really a completely different style of movie and make it so consistent. Just amazing. He's the master of the sequel. Because we then had Terminator 2, which is another one of the best sequels of all time. One of the best action films of all time. I mean, Terminator 2 is just... I could talk about that film forever. And then we have True Lies, which is just such a great, fun action movie. Then we have Titanic, which everyone is dunking on Titanic recently. I don't know what it is, but I'm just seeing so many like, oh, Titanic is so terrible. It's an amazing movie. Like, just the attention to detail alone. Maybe it's the romance that throws people off, but I think it's a really earnest... And I feel like it's interesting because there's like maybe a cynicism to some of the early James Cameron movies. There's a kind of like a hard edge to it, like Terminator and Aliens. But then with The Abyss, there's something a bit more... I don't know. There's something a bit more... there's more of a light touch in The Abyss. And then Terminator 2, he kind of dives into this kind of, not sentimentality, but there's definitely more emotion coming in. And then you get to Titanic, and it's almost like full-on schmaltz, And the same with Avatar. And Avatar is endlessly interesting to me as one of the biggest films of all time at this point. For 10 years, it was the most successful movie ever that no one seemed to like. It came out, everyone was talking about it, everyone loved it, and then it just dropped off a cliff and everyone hated it. And that's what I love. Avatar. I think it's a great movie, and most people disagree with me on that, and I can't wait to see what he does with these sequels. Like I said, he's the master of the sequel. will he be able to pull it off? I can't wait to see. But of course, you know, like everything else these days, it's kind of, it's been cancelled right now. This production has been suspended. But I love that Cameron hasn't gone, okay, biggest movie ever, let's get Avatar 2 on the go, we'll get it out in a couple of years. We're now like 10 plus years removed, and I know people, you know, it's been going on for years now, the whole Avatar 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. But I think if anyone you want to trust, you know, this kind of multi-sequel follow-up with, I think James Cameron's a pretty safe bet. And I can't wait to see what he does with it. I think that when those films come out, I think people are going to be really surprised. I think I think a lot of crow is going to be eaten when that film comes out, and I think people are going to be surprised by how good it is because, well, that's what I think. That's what I hope. There's always the case that he, you know, like George Lucas, he might be going, I may have gone too far in a few places, and maybe Avatar 2 might not be a good movie. I don't know, but I have such faith in him as a visual cinematic storyteller. Anyway. Love James Cameron, and that's pretty much it. There's probably more I could talk about. As I said, Ridley Scott. I'm just seeing Blade Runner on the shelf. I love Ridley Scott. Really could go on and on and on and on and on, and you know. But those kind of the big ones for me, I think. So that was kind of unofficially my top 20 or top 21, 22 filmmakers at the moment. But then you have something like Pavel Pavlikovsky, who I've only seen 2 of his films, so it's a bit, you know. And there's many people I could say. F.W. Murnau from the silent era. You know, I'm now seeing things on the shelf. Billy Wilder is one I love. I've only seen, like, I think 2 of his films. So, Francis Ford Coppola. I'm just looking at films on the shelf now, you know. So, yeah, anyway, so I'll leave it there. Ingmar Bergman. I've only seen a couple of his films, so I don't feel like I can classify that just yet. So, these things are in flux. But I'll leave it there. Thank you for watching. Leave some comment. Actually, no. Don't leave comments down below on what your favorite filmmakers are. Go over to Daisuke's channel. Leave a comment under his video, which I'll link under this one, so you'll be able to find it. Go to his video and leave your favorite filmmaker comments down there, I think, if you want. I don't know. But anyway, so this is really just a response to him, I suppose. But hopefully you enjoyed, and you know, I'll look for your comments on his video or under mine if you feel like to. That'd be great. I'd love to hear some comments as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
It's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans of Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's not quite as cool as you.